This week there is a text from Job and a text from John. We are not going to spend much time with the Job passage because it addresses this idea of wisdom as a feminine personification ideal. And the reason we're not spending a lot of time there is because next week also focuses on that for the Old Testament. And I think next week's passage lends itself really well to our topic at hand. I will just say this. If you look to the Job text, which is in the description of the video, if you want to look at the references, what I think is important to note is that wisdom is a feminine word in Hebrew, and it is the thing that cannot be bought, that cannot be sought, that cannot be swindled away, given away, traded for. So more on that next week. The other passage for today, like I said, is from John, and it is that of Mary and Martha shortly after Lazarus died, 4 days to be exact. I write about this text in Faith Doesn't Erase Grief from a grief perspective. And today we're going to talk about it from the how God sees women perspective. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite stories, one that I hadn't given a whole lot of time to until I really started embracing my study of grief from a believer's perspective. And now, reading this text with the added commentary from Wilcox, it's fuller, it's bigger, and there's more depth to it than I even had from it before. So one of the nuggets that really doesn't have much to do, really anything to do with our purpose here, is that Jesus waited as long as he did, the 4 days to get there, because of the time it was believed the spirit lingered with the body. So essentially, he was removing all question, all doubt that he didn't really raise Lazarus, right? That if he had come sooner, there would be this debate. Well, he didn't really raise Lazarus because Lazarus' spirit was just nearby, so he just helped the spirit back into the body. Again, neither here nor there for our purposes, but an interesting tidbit. So the title of today, if you looked in the description, is In a Mary and Martha World, Be You, right? So a long time ago, there was a book, Being a Mary in a Martha World, or a Martha and a Mary, I don't remember which one, whatever. But my argument is this. God would look at us and say, in a Mary or Martha world, be you. Be who you are, who I have created you to be. And that is what we see in this interaction of Jesus with both Martha and Mary. They have different needs in this moment of grief. As their grief is at its height, they are coping differently because they are different people. They are grieving differently because they are different people. And this is known. This is where Jesus' divinity comes to the surface, right? He understands them. He sees them. He knows them. He's ministered and lived and probably played alongside of these women throughout his life. Lazarus, if you watch The Chosen, is painted as a very dear friend of his, who had a lifetime of interaction. I think sometimes when we read the Gospels, it's easy to forget, right, that there was a whole life before his ministry began and before we get to the quickly approaching Holy Week. He did not exist in a bubble. He had relationships and friendships and connections that were good and connections that were bad. There were people, I'm certain, that didn't like him. I'm sure that he was probably made fun of at times because he was the kid of the woman who claimed that she was just impregnated but hadn't had sex with her husband, right? So, or her fiance at the time. In these interactions, Jesus shows that he knows Martha and Mary individually, that he recognizes their needs. And he speaks to those. He speaks to those needs, and he speaks to the care that they require, which to me says God wants for us, all of us, not just women, to understand who we are created to be and to live into that, to be that person. Because we are created differently so that we can play off of, fill the gaps within one another. That's what we need. And that's how God sees us. We aren't competition with one another. I think society does that to women from a very young age. We compete with one another for jobs, for relationships, for friendships, for everything. And I don't think the church helps with that, right? This emphasis that many Christian churches have on the primary roles of women is to be married and have children, that breeds competition given the ratio of women to men that exists in most churches and youth groups. We are seen as much more than that, and it is our uniqueness, the things that are individual to you, that God implanted in you, that are different, that God celebrates. It's what drives the different ways that God communicates with you versus the way that God communicates with me. We are meant to be individuals. We are meant to be different from one another, and yet know that what unites us is that difference that God implanted in each and every person, each and every being, that is not to be debated or questioned. So where society, and I do believe many churches would pit women against one another, what Jesus shows in this interaction is it's not about competition. It's not about one being better than the other, as you can see a little bit of that going on between Martha and Mary. A little judgment, a little criticism in their interactions, even earlier when Jesus is visiting, right? One criticizing the other for what they're doing. And Jesus shuts that down, and he shuts it down here as well, because it's not about that. It's about what each person needs, that we are seen individually as much as communally. The individual ways in which we are created are meant to help us understand our gifts and our strengths to play into the community, because it is the community that builds, right? So there are arms and hands and feet. Everybody's different, but everybody is needed. And I think that's our emphasis for today. We're not meant to be competing with one another, but to be doing what we are called to do, and understanding and believing that as our siblings do what they are called to do, it all works together for the building of the kingdom that awaits us. There you go. So next week we will talk more about wisdom personified as a woman. and a couple other directions we've got happening. Holy Week is approaching, so more coming there. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Celebrate who you are individually, who you have been created to be, and look at how who you are helps build upon, strengthen, complete who others in your sphere have been created to be, and how together, rather than in competition, we can fulfill and be fulfilled and experience life as it is meant to be experienced. Let me know how it goes. I'll see you next week.